Your engagement is important for the channel's development. Please subscribe and leave a comment if you find the content interesting.
All right, I'm going to try and lay this out as straight as I can. My hands are still shaking, and the caffeine isn't helping, just making it worse. I'm writing this in a truck stop parking lot in some godforsaken town whose name I didn't even bother to learn. It smells like diesel, wet asphalt, and cheap diner food. These are familiar smells, the kind that usually calm me down. Not today. Today they feel alien, like a flimsy set, with something else hiding right behind it. My name's Dan. I'm 40. Been driving a truck for the last 15 years, mostly logging. It's hard work, but it's honest. It's just you, the road, the roar of the engine, and thousands of miles to cover. I like it. The quiet, the time to think. The feeling of being in control of this massive machine. You're the king of the road until you pull over to catch a few hours of sleep. The route I'm about to talk about, I know it like the back of my hand. Highway 199, the one that snakes through the Six Rivers National Forest in Northern California. This ain't the scenic route for tourists. It's a working artery. Narrow, winding, with steep drop-offs and perpetual shadows from the giant redwoods. Locals call it the Bloody Highway because of all the wrecks. There are no streetlights. Cell service vanishes for miles at a time, and your only companions are other guys like me and the occasional deer that jumps out in front of you. There's one stretch I especially hate. It starts right after the mile 44 marker. 4 miles of nothing but blind curves where the road narrows so much 2 rigs can't pass each other. The trees crowd right up to the asphalt, their branches locking together overhead, creating a dark tunnel even during the day. At night, the place turns into an ink blot. Your headlights only carve out a small slice of road ahead, and everything else is an impenetrable darkness that feels alive and solid. Last night's run was business as usual. Loaded up in Crescent City, had to get the logs to a lumber mill in Grants Pass, Oregon. I left late, around 10 p.m. I like driving at night. Fewer cars, it's cooler, and the world just seems simpler. I was listening to some history podcast, sipping lukewarm coffee from my thermos, and thinking I needed to remember to call my sister this weekend. It's my nephew's birthday. Everything was painfully normal. I passed the mile 44 marker. The radio hissed and died, replaced by static. Normal for this stretch. I switched it off, and the cab filled with only the hum of the engine and the whisper of the tires. The darkness outside thickened. I flipped on my high beams. 2 powerful beams cut through the gloom, lighting up the road for 100 yards or so. On both sides, the forest stood like a wall. Impenetrable. Ancient. Sometimes I felt like those trees had seen things that would make a man go insane. And then it happened. It didn't bolt onto the road like a deer or a bear. They usually freeze for a second, blinded by the lights, or just scramble across. This thing, it stepped out. It stepped out from behind a massive redwood on the shoulder, right into my headlights. My first thought was, what the hell? It was huge. Taller than a man, but it didn't move like one. It was hunched over almost on all fours, but not like an animal. It was the posture of a predator about to pounce. Long, unnaturally thin limbs, covered in dark, matted fur. Its head was down, so I couldn't see its face, but I saw the light of my beams glint off something wet on it. I slammed on the brakes. You know what it's like to emergency brake a fully loaded logging truck? It's hell. The shriek of the brakes is deafening. The smell of burning rubber fills the cab. The trailer started to fishtail, and I gripped the wheel, fighting to keep the rig in my lane. The whole thing took maybe 2-3 seconds,
but it stretched into an eternity for me. I saw it lift its head, and I saw its eyes. They glowed yellow in my headlights. It wasn't a reflection. They were lit from within, like two hot coals. And in those eyes was hate. Pure, primal, animal hate. Its face was long, like a wolf's or a big dog's, but it wasn't a wolf. Its mouth was partly open, and I saw rows of teeth, too long, too sharp, like needles. Then came the impact. The sound was disgusting. A dull, wet crunch like I'd hit a sack of bones and meat. The truck jerked, and something scraped under the bumper. I was thrown forward, the seatbelt digging into my chest. The rig finally lurched to a stop, blocking both lanes. The engine stalled. Then, silence. Absolute ringing silence after the deafening roar. The cab smelled like dust and my own sweat. I sat there, clutching the wheel, trying to catch my breath. My heart was hammering in my throat. "Deer," I said out loud. "Just a really big deer, or an elk, or a bear." But I knew I was lying to myself. I've hit animals before. This wasn't that. No animal looks at you like that. No animal has eyes like that. I sat like that for maybe 5 minutes, trying to calm down. I had to get out, check the damage, move the carcass off the road if I could. I couldn't just sit here in the middle of the highway. Sooner or later, another truck would come through, and then there'd be real trouble. I turned on my hazard lights. The orange lights started flashing, snatching pieces of the road and the trees out of the darkness, creating a jerky, anxious rhythm. I grabbed my heavy mag light from the passenger seat. I don't know why. For security, I guess. The cab door opened with a groan that sounded deafening in the silence. I climbed down onto the asphalt. The night air was cold and damp, smelling of pine needles and wet earth. The silence was crushing. The forest wasn't making a sound. No crickets, no nightbirds. Nothing. Just the rush of blood in my own ears. I walked around to the front of the truck. The grille was dented, one headlight smashed. Under the bumper was a large, shapeless, dark mass. That was it. I aimed the beam of the flashlight. The sight was grotesque. The creature was lying on its side, its limbs twisted at unnatural angles. The dark fur was matted with blood and grime. It was definitely not any animal I could identify. The body was wolf-like, but also humanoid. The arms and legs were too long, the shoulders too broad. The fingers on its front paws were long, almost human-like, with broken black claws. I got closer, wrinkling my nose at the smell. It stank of wet dog, blood, and something else. Something musky, feral. I shone the light on its head. The long snout was smashed, and dark blood trickled from its mouth. The yellow eyes were closed. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. I didn't know what to do. Call the cops? What would I say? I hit a werewolf? They'd lock me in a psych ward for the rest of my life. I just had to drag it to the shoulder and get the hell out of there. I pocketed the flashlight and bent down to grab it by a foreleg. The fur felt coarse and wiry. I pulled. The body was incredibly heavy, but it budged. I dragged it a couple of feet, toward the very edge of the road, and then it twitched. I jumped back, my heart skipping a beat. I aimed the light at it again. It wasn't moving. Must have been a death throw, just nerves firing. I approached again, this time more cautiously. I took hold of the leg again, and in that instant, its eyes snapped open. 2 yellow coals burned into me. They were brighter than before, and they didn't just hold hate anymore. Now they held purpose. The creature made a sound. It wasn't a growl or a howl. It was a low, gurgling rattle that came from deep inside its crushed chest. A sound that freezes your blood. It started to get up. Broken bones were setting themselves with wet cracks and pops.
It was the most sickening sound I've ever heard. The sound of a wet fracture over and over. Its body contorted, straightened, taking on a new shape. In seconds, it went from a mangled heap of flesh to a killing machine standing on its hind legs. It was 2 heads taller than me. Lean, sinewy, with unnaturally long arms that ended in sickle-like claws. Its smashed snout was healing before my eyes. Wounds knitted themselves shut. Blood seemed to seep back into its flesh. It bared a mouthful of needle-sharp teeth and made that gurgling sound again. I was frozen. My brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. It couldn't be real. It was a dream, a hallucination from the impact. But the smell, the sound, the cold terror gripping my body, it was all real. I stumbled backward and fell hard on the asphalt. The mag light flew from my hand and rolled to the side, its beam lighting up the trunk of a nearby tree. I was left in the half-light of my flashing hazards. The creature took a step toward me. Slow, savoring the moment. I saw the muscles in its legs tense. It was going to leap. I shut my eyes, waiting for the end. And then a crack echoed from the forest. It wasn't the snap of a dry twig. It was the sound of a thick, living tree snapping, as if something massive was plowing through the woods, ignoring any obstacles. The werewolf, I don't know what else to call it, froze. It turned its head toward the sound. Its bat-like ears twitched. It snarled, but the confidence was gone. There was a new note in it. Was it fear? The cracking got louder. Closer. I lay on the asphalt, my gaze shifting from the monster in front of me to the black wall of the forest. What the hell could scare this thing? From the darkness between the trees, it stepped onto the road. I've read the stories, seen the blurry photos, watched the stupid TV shows, but nothing. Absolutely nothing. Could have prepared me for this. It was Bigfoot. Sasquatch. Whatever you want to call it. But it wasn't like they describe it. It wasn't an ape. It was like a primal human, but scaled up to an impossible size. It had to be 9 feet tall, with shoulders like a grizzly bear. Its whole body was covered in long, thick, dark brown fur, almost black. But it wasn't animal fur. It grew like human hair, longer on its head and forearms. The face. Its face was the scariest part. It was almost human. Deep-set dark eyes, a wide, flat nose, thin lips pressed into a grim line. No ape-like expressions. There was intelligence in its gaze. An ancient, cold, unknowable intelligence. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking at the werewolf. And its expression wasn't fear or rage. It was cold, calculating assessment. The werewolf crouched low, hissing like a cat, the hackles on its neck standing up. It clearly wasn't expecting this guest. The Sasquatch took another step. The asphalt seemed to sag under its weight. It moved with an impossible grace for its size. Not like an animal, but like a seasoned fighter. The werewolf charged. It was a blur of claws and teeth. It leaped, aiming for the giant's throat. What happened next took less than a second. The Sasquatch didn't dodge. It just raised one of its massive shovel-like hands. It caught the werewolf midair. Not grabbed, but caught it, like a baseball. There was a crack of bone. With its other hand, the Sasquatch took hold of the werewolf's head and twisted. A sharp, dry snap echoed in the night. The werewolf's body went limp. But the Sasquatch didn't stop. It kept twisting. With a sickening tearing sound, the creature's head came off its body. The Sasquatch held the headless body in one hand and the head in the other. Dark, thick blood poured onto the asphalt. It looked at the head in its hand with an expression of disgust. Then it tossed it aside. It hit my truck with a thud and landed on the shoulder. It threw the body down next to it. I lay on the ground, unable to move. I had just watched one mythical creature tear the head off another mythical creature. My brain had turned to mush. I thought I was going to die of a heart attack right there. The Sasquatch stood over the corpse for a few seconds, breathing heavily. Puffs of steam came from its nostrils. Then it slowly turned its head, and it looked at me. Its eyes. I'll never forget those eyes. They were dark, bottomless pits. There was nothing human in them, no pity, no curiosity, no malice. It was the look of a scientist studying an insect, or a butcher sizing up a carcass. Cold, detached, analytical. I thought this was it. It was going to kill me, just like the other thing. Snap my neck and toss me in a ditch. But it didn't move. It just stared. Then its gaze shifted to my truck, to the flashing hazard lights, the busted headlight, the open cab door, and it started walking. Not toward me, toward my truck. It walked up to the driver's side door and peered inside. Its enormous head almost filled the entire doorway. It stood like that for a minute, studying the cab. I could see its eyes moving, scanning the dashboard, the seats, the sleeper cab. Then it did something that finally broke my brain. It reached its massive hand into the cab. Its movements were clumsy in the confined space, but also surprisingly precise. It wasn't just smashing things. It was searching. First, it picked up my thermos of coffee. It brought it to its face, sniffed it. Then, to my astonishment, it carefully unscrewed the cap, sniffed the contents, and poured the last of the coffee onto the ground. It tucked the thermos itself somewhere into the fur on its side. Then it reached for the glove box. Its thick fingers couldn't get the latch. It frowned. Yes, I swear to God, it frowned, and it was terrifyingly human. It tapped the glove box door lightly and it popped open. It began methodically pulling things out. My insurance papers, the truck manual, a pack of napkins. Each item it brought to its face, examined, sniffed. It dropped most of them on the cab floor, but an old Zippo lighter my dad gave me and a bag of beef jerky it took. Tucked them away in its fur. I lay on the asphalt watching this in a state of total shock. The horror of the monster fight was being replaced by a different, deeper, more disturbing horror. This wasn't an animal. Animals don't do this. This was a sentient being. It wasn't just acting on instinct. It was looting. It was searching my truck with a cold, purposeful methodology. Like a person. It looked into the sleeper compartment. Its hand found my backpack. It pulled it out of the cab and set it on the ground next to it. With one motion, it ripped the zipper open. It dumped the contents onto the asphalt. A change of clothes, a book, toiletries, a phone charger. It ignored everything except for 2 items. It picked up my headlamp, turned it over in its hands, found the button, and switched it on. A bright beam of light hit it in the face. It didn't flinch or cry out. It just blinked a few times, then aimed the beam at the trees, then at me, then back at the trees. It was studying how the thing worked. Turned it off, on, off. Satisfied, it hung the headlamp around its own neck. Next, it grabbed my first aid kit. A small, red, zippered pouch. It tore that open too. Pulled out bandages, band-aids, hydrogen peroxide. It examined each item. Then, a small tube of pain-relieving ointment caught its attention. It unscrewed the cap, squeezed a little onto its finger and rubbed it. Sniffed it. Then it did something that made the hair on my arms stand up. It looked at its own hand, the one it had used to catch the werewolf. There were deep claw marks on it, oozing dark blood. He slowly, methodically started rubbing the ointment into his own wounds. That was it for me. For my sanity. This creature wasn't just intelligent. It understood tools. It understood medicine. This wasn't some wild man of the woods. This was something else. Something we don't have a name for. When it was done with the ointment, it tossed the empty tube aside. It gathered up all the bandages and tucked them away, too. It wasn't interested in the rest. It peered into the cab one last time. Its gaze fell on the dashboard. Stuck there with Velcro was a photograph. My sister and her son, my nephew I was planning to call. They were smiling, standing in front of some amusement park. The Sasquatch reached in and very carefully, almost gently, peeled the photo off the Velcro. It held it right up to its eyes. It stared at it for what felt like forever. I couldn't read its expression. It wasn't curiosity. It was something like recognition? Sadness, I don't know. It didn't take the photo, it just as carefully placed it on the driver's seat. Then it straightened up to its full giant height. It cast one last look at me, at the truck, at the two bodies on the shoulder. It turned, and as silently as it appeared, it stepped back into the forest. There was a crash of breaking branches that quickly faded into the distance. And then, silence again. I don't know how long I lay on the asphalt. 10 minutes, an hour. I just stared at the black sky and tried to make my brain work. Eventually, self-preservation kicked in. I got to my feet, my legs shaking. Everything hurt. I found my mag light. I lit up the scene of the fight. There was blood everywhere. The black, thick blood of the werewolf, and a few drops of a darker, almost purple blood from the Sasquatch's wounded hand. The werewolf's body was where it had been dropped. The head lay a few feet away, its yellow eyes now dull and lifeless. I walked over and kicked it. It was heavy, like a rock. I had to leave. I didn't bother moving anything. I scrambled back into the cab. My stuff was scattered all over the floor. I looked at the seat. The photo of my sister and nephew was lying there, face up. I grabbed it, my hands trembling. The key was in the ignition. I turned it. The engine sputtered a few times, but it started. Thank God. I flicked on the headlights. The one remaining light lit up the road. I threw it in gear and floored it. I drove like a bat out of hell. I didn't look at the speedometer. I just wanted to get as far away from mile 44 as I could. Every snap of a branch, every rustle outside the window made me jump. I felt like from behind every tree a pair of dark, intelligent eyes was watching me. I made it to this truck stop around dawn. Parked in the farthest corner. Locked all the doors, drew the curtains on the windows. I sat like that for hours, just staring into space. Then I started writing this. I don't know what to do. I can't tell anyone about this. They'll think I'm crazy. Or high, I've been clean for 10 years. But who would believe me? I checked the truck. The grill and bumper have dents and dried black blood on them. I scraped some off into a napkin. I don't know why. The werewolf head I kicked left a smear on my boot. A thick, tar-like substance. What were they? Why were they fighting? Were they enemies? Or was it some territorial dispute I just happened to drive into? And the scariest part, that Sasquatch. It wasn't a savior, it didn't protect me. I was just part of the landscape to it. It killed the werewolf because it was on its turf, or because they're enemies, I don't know. And then it just took what it needed. Like a person finding an abandoned car after a crash and stripping it for parts. It took a thermos, a lighter, beef jerky, a headlamp, bandages, and it knew how to use them. It knew what wound ointment was for. That means they're not just wild creatures. They're watching us, they're learning, they're taking our things.
Maybe they live out there in the woods in the shadow of our civilization, using our technology. Our junk is their treasure. And the photo. Why did it leave the photo? It looked at it and put it back. What did it see in the smiles of my sister and nephew? Did it recognize something in them? Or did it just decide it had no practical value? That question bothers me more than anything. That glimpse of something incomprehensible, not animal, not human in its behavior. I'm sitting here looking at the woods outside my window. They're not just trees anymore. They're a screen. A curtain hiding a world we have no idea about. A world where the monsters are real. And they're not just hiding. They're watching. And sometimes, they step out onto the road. I have to get back to work. I have to finish this haul. But I don't know if I can ever drive that highway again. I don't know if I can ever drive at night again, period. I'm putting this out there because I don't know where else to go. Maybe one of you has seen something like this. Maybe someone knows what these things are. Maybe I'm just losing my mind. But I know what I saw. And I know that somewhere out there, in that forest, a 9-foot-tall creature is walking around with my headlamp around its neck, with my bandages in its possession. And it knows how to treat its own wounds. And I don't think it was happy to see me. I was an inconvenience. And next time, it might just decide to get rid of the inconvenience too. I don't know what to do. Just be careful out there on the lonely roads, especially at night. You never know what might step out of the dark, and you never know what might be waiting for it. Story 2. Hey everyone. I don't know how to start this. My regular listeners know me as Alex, host of Screams in the Night. For 3 years, I've traveled the country with a recorder and a mic, collecting stories. Ghosts, strange creatures, urban legends. You know the drill. It's a dream job, right? Sitting around a fire with strangers, listening to their deepest fears, and then sharing them with the world. Most stories are just that. Stories. Spooky, sure. The kind that make you sleep with the lights on sometimes, but deep down, you know their folklore. Echoes of old fears. Whispers of something that might have been, but probably wasn't. I've learned to separate the truth from the fiction, the genuine terror from the desire for attention. And then there was episode 42. It never aired. It never will. The official reason I gave my small but loyal Patreon community was that the audio files were corrupted during a move. That was a lie. The files were perfectly fine. I deleted them myself, erased them, wiped them from every hard drive, every cloud backup. I would have burned them if I could. But the transcript survived. I typed it up the day after the recording while the story was still burning in my memory. And now I can't get rid of it. It sits on my desk, a stack of paper that feels heavier than lead. I can't burn it. I feel like it wouldn't change anything. The story is already inside me, so I'm posting it here. Maybe I'm just trying to share the burden. Maybe I'm looking for confirmation that I'm not going crazy. Or maybe, and this is what terrifies me the most, I'm just trying to warn you. Because after that recording, the world didn't feel the same. It felt thinner, and I'm afraid something might have slipped through the cracks. The man I interviewed was named Amos. Finding him was next to impossible. I heard about him from a bartender in a rundown town deep in the heart of the Bitterroot Mountains, on the Idaho-Montana border. Old Amos? He don't take kindly to strangers. Been living out in those woods for 50 years. They say he's seen everything those woods have to hide, the bartender told me, polishing a glass. It took 2 weeks of convincing, a carton of smokes and a bottle of good whiskey.
passed along through the one trapper who delivered supplies to Amos once a season, to get him to agree. His terms were strict. No cameras, just me and my recorder. And I had to come alone. The journey to his cabin was an ordeal in itself. 10 miles down a decommissioned logging road, then another 3 miles on foot along a barely there game trail the trapper had pointed out. The air was different out here. Thick, smelling of damp earth, pine, and something else. Solitude. An absolute, deafening solitude. The cabin was exactly as I'd imagined. Small, sturdy, built from ancient logs darkened by time and weather. Smoke curled lazily from a stone chimney. Amos himself was waiting for me on the porch. He was tall and lean, like an old weathered tree. His face was a road map of wrinkles, and his faded blue eyes looked out at the world with an infinite weariness. We barely exchanged a word until we were settled inside. The cabin smelled of wood smoke, dried herbs, cured leather, and something else. Raw meat. I set my recorder on the rough wooden table between us, poured him a glass of the whiskey I'd brought, and pressed record. What you're about to read is the exact transcript of that conversation. I've tried to capture his speech patterns, the pauses, everything. But I can't convey the most important part. The thing that made me destroy the recording. The voice. When I listened back later in the silence of my motel room, I heard it. Underneath Amos's low, gravelly voice, there was another sound. Not background noise. Not static. It was like a low, hungry whisper. And the further the story went, the louder it got. And during the most terrifying parts, well, you'll see. I still have nightmares. I wake up to the sound of scratching at my window, even though I live on the 3rd floor. Sometimes, in the dead silence, I hear that same whisper, calling my name. Here's the transcript. Decide for yourself. But be careful. Some stories don't want to be told. Screams in the Night. Episode 42, unaired. Audio transcript date, October 14th, 2023. Location, undisclosed. Bitterroot Mountains. Participants, Alex, host, Amos, trapper. Begin recording. The sound of a crackling fire in a hearth. The sound of liquid being poured into a glass. A deep sigh.
All right, we're recording. This is Alex, host of Screams in the Night. I have a very special guest today. We are a long way from civilization, visiting a man who has lived here, in these woods, for the better part of his life. He's agreed to share a story that, as I understand it, he's kept for nearly 30 years. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me. Would you mind introducing yourself for our listeners? Voice is low, gravelly, as if unused. Amos. Just Amos. And there ain't no listeners out here. Just you, me, and the woods. And it's best the woods don't listen. Okay, Amos, as you wish. I was told you're one of the last true mountain men. You've lived out here alone for a very long time. You must know these woods like the back of your hand. Nobody knows these woods. To think so is pride. You just learn to live with them, not against them, but alongside. The forest. It's like the ocean. You can float on the surface, but you never know what's down in the deep. I've lived here, about 50 years. And all I've learned is that we ain't in charge. We're just guests. And temporary ones at that. You say that as if there's someone else in the woods, the owners. You don't think there are? You city folk think you've conquered everything. Planted your flags, paved your roads. Think that if you can't see something, it ain't there. But the woods remember.
The mountains remember. They were here long before us, and they'll be here long after. And they have their own inhabitants, their own laws. Are you talking about animals? Bears? Wolves? Them too. I respect the bear. He's strong. I respect the wolf. He's clever. But there are others. Things that don't make it into your books. That's exactly why I came. I was told you have a story. Something that happened many years ago. Something that changed these woods for you. Only the fire crackles. It didn't change the woods. It showed me their true face. The one they hide when the sun is up. 30 years. Yeah, about that. I was younger then. Stronger. Thought I knew it all. I was a trapper. Furs were still worth something back then. I set my lines, my snares. Lived by the rules. Took only what I needed to get through the winter. No more, no less. And what happened? First, I gotta tell you about the landlord. The landlord? Yep. I don't know what you call him. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, foolish names. To me, he was always just the landlord of the forest. He was here before me, the spirit of this place. I didn't get it at first. The first year, I'd lose a lot of my catch. I'd come up on a sprung trap, but the animal would be gone. And the trap wasn't broken. It was opened, carefully. I'd get mad, thought it was another trapper stealing from me. But the tracks, they were huge, deep, and always barefoot, even in the snow. You saw him? Saw him. A few times. Not like you and me are sitting here. Just glimpses. A massive, dark shape moving between the trees. Completely silent. Had to be 9-10 feet tall. Broad as a barn door. He didn't look like an ape. He looked human, but ancient, primal. You could feel the power coming off him and a sadness. Was he aggressive? Did he ever try to attack you? Never. That was the thing. He wasn't a monster. He was a part of this world. Its keeper, maybe. I learned the rules fast. If I left a part of my catch, a fish, maybe, on a big boulder by the creek, my traps were left alone. Sometimes, I'd find little gifts on my doorstep in return. A bundle of edible roots I'd never seen before, or wild honey, neatly wrapped in a big burdock leaf. We had a silent agreement. I stayed out of his territory. He let me live. He was predictable, a part of the natural order of things, like the seasons changing. Amos falls silent, the sound of him pouring another drink. His breathing becomes heavier. But something broke that order. Yeah, the sickness came. The sickness? You mean like a disease among the animals? His voice gets quieter, more intense. No, this wasn't a sickness you can see under a microscope. This was a blight. Pure hatred. It started with the smell. One spring, the air changed. There was a new scent on the wind, sweet, like rotting meat, but with a burnt chemical edge to it, like ozone after a lightning strike. Maybe an animal died and... No, I know the smell of death. This was different. This was the smell of wrongness. The woods went quiet. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I realized. The birds had stopped singing. The squirrels vanished. Even the jays, those eternal gossips, they shut up. The air got heavy, oppressive, like before a storm that just won't break. What happened next? I started finding the bodies, and that was the worst part. They weren't just dead animals. A grizzly bear, a huge male I'd known for years, found him by the creek. His spine had been ripped out, just torn clean from his back, and the carcass left to rot. A herd of deer, all of them killed, but not a one of them eaten, just had their necks snapped. And then I found a fox den. The vixen and all her kits had been torn to pieces and arranged in a circle, like something had been playing with them. My God. This wasn't the work of man or beast. A predator kills to eat. A man kills for a trophy or out of fear. This killed for the joy of it, for the act of killing itself. It savored the pain. I could feel it in the air. The forest was terrified. It had shrunk in on itself, gone into hiding. I called it the sickness in my head, or the hungering thing, because its hunger wasn't for flesh, but for life itself. Did you see it, this creature? Once, before that night. I was checking my snares at dusk near the edge of the big marsh, and I saw it on the other side of the clearing. I thought it was a large wolf at first, but it was wrong. Too tall at the shoulder, too thin. Its joints seemed to bend at unnatural angles. Its fur was patchy, matted, and you could see pale, almost gray skin underneath. It was standing on its hind legs, leaning against a tree with its front ones, and it was looking right at me. A pause. The sound of Amos swallowing hard. But the worst part wasn't its size or its shape. It was the eyes. They glowed faintly in the twilight, a pale, sickly yellow, and there was intelligence in them, a malicious, mocking intelligence. And it smiled. I swear to God, it smiled. Its mouth was stretched wide in a hideous grin, full of long, thin, needle-like teeth. It knew I saw it. It wanted me to see it. Then, without breaking eye contact, it slowly turned its head, snatched a squirrel off a branch with its teeth, and bit it in half with a wet crunch. It didn't eat it, just dropped the pieces and looked back at me. Then it turned and vanished silently into the shadows. I stood there till it was full dark, unable to move. That night was the first time in 30 years I bolted my cabin door. What do you think it was? Local legends talk about the Wendigo. Legends. Legends are warnings that turned into fairy tales over time. Wendigo, Skinwalker, Werewolf. The names don't matter. It was something ancient, something damned, something forever hungry. A thing that used to be something else, a man or a beast, but was consumed by its own hunger, its own hate, and became that. A hole in the world shaped like a wolf. And this led to that one night. Yeah, the night of the blood moon. That's what the old tribes that used to live here called it. Happens once every few decades. When the full moon gets real close to the earth and turns red from some dust in the atmosphere. But the old ones said that on those nights, the veil between the worlds gets thin, that the hungry spirits can reach through. I never put much stock in it. Until that night. What happened? It was quiet all day. A dead, heavy quiet. Not even a breeze stirred the treetops. The air was warm and wet, smelled like blood and copper. I knew something was coming. Every instinct in my body was screaming it. I checked my rifle, my trusty old 30x06. checked the shotgun, boarded up the small window in the back wall. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but I was preparing for the worst. Amos goes quiet again. His breathing is faster. In the background, under the crackling fire, a very low, almost imperceptible whisper can be heard. It sounds like distorted radio static. When it got dark, the landlord came. He came to your cabin? Right to it. I heard a sound outside, a low, guttural rumble. I'd heard it before, from a distance, but never this close. There was no threat in it. There was a plea and pain. I looked through a crack in the shutters. The moon was up, huge and red, like a wound in the night sky. And there he was, standing at the edge of the clearing in its light. The landlord. He was immense, a shadow given flesh. He wasn't looking at the cabin like a target. He was looking at it like a sanctuary. He was hurt? Yeah. He held up his left arm, an arm as thick as my leg. Blood was running down it, thick, almost black in the moonlight. From his shoulder to his elbow was a deep, ragged wound. 3 parallel gashes, claws. He looked at me, then at his wound. Then he nodded toward the dark woods behind him. And I understood everything. The sickness was hunting him. The landlord of the forest. And he had come to me. Not to attack, but to ask for help. He knew my cabin was the only fortress in these woods. What did you do? What could I do? I opened the door. It was the craziest decision of my life. I threw the bolt and he came inside. My God, I never realized how big he was. He had to duck to get through the door. The cabin instantly felt tiny. The smell from him was strong, but not bad. It smelled of damp earth, pine needles, moss, and something musky, like a wild thing. He went to the far corner and sat down, leaning against the wall. He just sat there and waited. And I locked the door again, threw the bolt, and stood by the window with my rifle. 2 completely different creatures, 2 masters of our own worlds in one little cabin, waiting for a common enemy. It was surreal. And it came. His voice drops to a whisper. It came. We heard it first. A howl. But it wasn't a wolf's howl. It was the sound of tearing metal mixed with a man screaming in agony. High-pitched, cutting. It came from all directions at once. Then the scratching started. On the walls. On the roof. Lightly, like someone dragging their fingernails across the wood. Testing. Looking for a weak spot. The landlord rumbled in his corner, a low growl in his chest. The hair on his back stood on end. Did you see it? I looked through a peephole I'd drilled in the wall, and I saw it. It was circling the clearing. In the red moonlight, it looked even worse than the first time. It seemed to shimmer. Its outline was constantly shifting. One moment it looked like a great wolf. The next it would stretch out, becoming almost man-shaped. It was fast, unbelievably fast. And then it stopped and looked right at me, right into my eyes. And it smiled again.
The whisper on the recording gets slightly louder. You can almost make out syllable-like sounds, but the language is unrecognizable.
Then the assault began. The first hit came against the door. The whole cabin shook with the force of it. I fired, right through the door. A 30-06 round should stop a moose in its tracks. I heard a shriek, furious, full of pain. But then another hit, and another. The door, made of thick oak planks, was splintering. Then it moved to the windows. I'd boarded them up, but it just started tearing the boards off. Its claws were long, like knives. I could see them poking through the cracks. I fired the shotgun. A blast of buckshot blew the shutter to splinters. Another shriek. But it didn't back down. And the landlord? What was he doing? He was my shield. When the thing started breaking through the roof, he shot to his feet and braced the ceiling beams with his back. I could hear his bones creak under the strain. When a clawed hand smashed through the broken window, he grabbed it with his own massive hand and snapped it with a crack. The shrieking outside was deafening. The whole cabin filled with the smell of blood, the landlord's dark blood and the foul, sickening blood of that thing. It was a siege from hell that lasted an eternity. I was firing, reloading, firing again. My shoulder was bruised raw from the recoil. My ears were ringing. Gun smoke mixed with the smell of blood and fear. And it just kept coming. I could see through the cracks how the wounds I gave it were closing, right before my eyes. The flesh and skin would bubble and knit themselves back together. That thing didn't feel pain, only rage. How did you survive? The night was ending. The moon started to pale in the west. The creature seemed to get desperate. It stopped being clever. It just threw itself at the door with all its demonic strength. A crash. A splintering sound. Another crash. The door bowed inward. The bolt shot out of its housing. I knew this was it. I raised my rifle, knowing I had one bullet left. And in that moment, the landlord looked at me.
Amos falls silent. I can hear his ragged breathing. The whisper on the recording is clearer now, almost like shortwave interference, but it has a rhythm, like something trying to speak.
In his eyes. I'll never forget his eyes. It wasn't the rage of a beast. It was wisdom and resolve. He knew this thing couldn't be killed with bullets or claws. He'd known it from the start. He gave me one single nod, like he was saying goodbye. And the moment the door exploded into splinters, he charged. What did he do? The thing flew inside, a tangle of black fur, claws, and teeth. It was about to tear me to shreds, but it never got the chance. The landlord hit it like a freight train. He didn't try to fight it, he just wrapped it in his mighty arms, crushed it to his chest, and they both tumbled back out of the cabin and onto the clearing. I could see the creature tearing and slashing at his body, ripping out chunks of flesh. But he held on. He just held it, refusing to let go. His blood was soaking the ground. He sacrificed himself? It was more than a sacrifice. He had a plan. I only understood it when I saw where he was dragging the screeching thing. He wasn't trying to choke it. He was dragging it toward the bog, toward the mire at the edge of my clearing, an old, deep patch of quicksand that nothing ever came out of. The creature realized what was happening. It thrashed with twice the fury, but the landlord was stronger. He was the spirit of this forest, and he wasn't giving it up without a fight. He walked into the mire up to his knees, then his waist, pulling his enemy down with him. They drowned? I stood on the threshold of my ruined cabin and watched. The creature started to panic. Its regeneration was useless against the mud that was choking its mouth, its nose, its eyes. It couldn't shriek anymore, only gurgle. The landlord, bleeding from 100 wounds, sank deeper and deeper. The last thing I saw was his huge, furred hand holding the creature's head beneath the surface of the black, oily water. He held it there as the mire slowly sucked them both down. Then the hand was gone. A final ripple spread across the surface, and then it was silent. Complete silence falls. Even the fire seems to have died down. The whisper on the recording is gone. The sun came up, but it brought no warmth. The forest was dead. The silence was absolute. No birdsong, no crickets, nothing. Like someone had turned off the sound. I walked to the edge of the bog. The surface was smooth as glass, like nothing had ever happened. You never saw either of them again? Never. The landlord was gone. He took the sickness with him, down to the bottom, but he paid for it with his life, and the life of the forest. What do you mean? The woods never recovered. They're empty. The animals came back, but it's not the same. The birds sing, but there's no joy in it. It's like the soul was ripped out of this place. I still live here. It's my home. But now it's a haunted home. Haunted by the ghost of a guardian who gave everything to save it. I stayed to remember, so that someone would. Amos, I don't know what to say. What do you believe that was? After a long pause, I believe there's an order to things, a balance, and there are things that try to break it. The landlord was a part of that balance, and the sickness, it was a mistake, a curse, a hungry ghost that didn't belong here. And where they went, a deep, weary sigh. Some things are better left buried in the mud and not disturbed, ever.
My conclusion. I turned off the recorder. We sat in silence for another 10 minutes. Then I thanked him, left the rest of the whiskey and the carton of smokes on the table, and left. I didn't look back. The entire way back to my car, and then the entire drive back to the motel, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. That something was looking at me from the shadows between the trees. That night, I listened to the recording, and I heard the whisper. I played it back again and again. It was there, underneath Amos's voice. Faint, but insistent. I tried to clean the audio, to isolate it. At the story's peak, when Amos describes the assault on the cabin, there's a piercing shriek on the tape. It's not a human sound, and it definitely wasn't Amos. That shriek wasn't there when I was sitting with him. I'm sure of it. I didn't sleep for 3 days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw a thin, dark figure with glowing yellow eyes. I could smell rotting meat. I started to hear scratching, faint but distinct, outside my motel room door, outside my apartment window when I got home. I deleted the files. I smashed the hard drive, but it didn't help. The story was already inside me. I think Amos was wrong about one thing. He thought the landlord had buried the sickness for good. But things like that don't die. They just wait. And they get hungry. I don't think the sickness is just a creature. It's an idea. A virus. A story that once told infects the listener. Amos carried it for 30 years and it slowly poisoned the woods around him. And now he's passed it to me. And I've just passed it to you. I'm sorry. I just can't carry it alone anymore. I'm writing this at 3 in the morning. My apartment is completely silent, but I can hear it. Can you hear it too? That sound, like something scratching at your door.